Final Fantasy XVI officially releases tomorrow, and I would like to thank Square Enix for providing me a pre-release copy of the game. I've been playing through it, and this is, and I've been saying it for a long time, one of my most anticipated games of the year. And after playing some of the best releases this year, Resident Evil 4 Remake, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Hogwarts Legacy, Dead Space Remake, I really believe that Final Fantasy XVI is a contender for Game of the Year. Everything that I've wanted out of this game since we initially saw it back in the summer of 2020 is being ultimately realized in this game. Does it have its problems? Sure, but what I wanted out of a major Final Fantasy game, this has, and then some. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the game, but I want to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. All of the gameplay that you're going to see in this video, very much a part of the earlier portion of the game. And obviously, the story is always going to be incredibly important in a Final Fantasy game, and this one does not disappoint, and I want to make sure all of you guys go into it fresh come tomorrow, because ups and downs, it is a roller coaster of emotions. And let's talk all about it. Obviously, the game is much more than just its story, but let's start off with that. Narratively, again, top-notch. Demo gave you a whirlwind of emotions, but it's not like that was the peak of the game. It's not front-loaded by any stretch of the imagination, and they said that, and ultimately that holds through throughout the entirety of the game. It's well-paced, it's got big moments that will leave you absolutely jaw-dropped, edge of your seat, and of course, for those of you that are newer to a Final Fantasy game, sometimes you'll have a long cutscene. You'll walk for a little bit and go right into another long cutscene. That's just the expectation in a Final Fantasy game, but this is a game that is also trying to bring in a new audience. Just know that going into it, it's an incredibly narrative-focused game. The cinematics look fantastic, and the cinematics are just incredibly well done. Just do expect the lengthier cutscenes through the game. The main character, of course, Clive Rossfield, an engaging character that has a lot of tumultuous moments. Maybe some people won't be completely on board with some of his character elements, but there's obviously a ton of reason why he behaves the way he does. And seeing his growth throughout the story is incredibly compelling to watch. A strong supporting cast of allies and enemies also rounds out a very, very strong character roster. And coming from a game that felt so disjointed in Final Fantasy 15, Final Fantasy 16 feels connected, and it wants the players to become incredibly immersed and invested into every aspect of the story. And while the scale of said story may be absolutely massive in terms of the tale the game is telling, there's a lot done that does keep the player engaged to the story, and it does a good job of keeping the player in for a long ride. Mystery, twists and turns, emotional and heartwarming moments. The story really has something and a little bit of everything. And you probably have noticed, if you have been keeping up with this game, a little bit more of a mature tone for a Final Fantasy game. And I do want to note, as I mentioned, the story, the scale of said story, the world of Valisthea, absolutely massive. However, active time lore, every game that's telling a big story needs to take notes. This needs to be in every game telling a big story going forward. This really helps keep everything connected, and more so, keeps the player immersed into this story and understanding everything going on. There's a lot going on in this story, and at any time you can pause the game, you could see character bios, and they have hundreds and hundreds of character profiles, area profiles, etc., etc., that you can open up at any time during a cutscene. You can read more about it. There's logs you can read throughout the game. It does everything in its power that while it is telling this massive scale story, it's keeping the player engaged and making sure they know what's going on. Just can't say enough good things about active time lore. It's something that when you see it in execution, you're like, obviously, this should be in every JRPG, every big RPG. But seeing it in execution, man, it just helps tie a story so much better and keeps the player much more immersed. Obviously, with Final Fantasy, it's gonna be a little bit of new and old. While there's gonna be a lot of elements in this game that will seem like a shift from Final Fantasy, and we'll get into gameplay in a second, which has seemingly been a big point of discussion, there's a lot of Final Fantasy love here, from the fantastical musical score, the icons being at the heart of the story, iconic Final Fantasy summonings, the enemies, abilities. This is still a Final Fantasy game designed to get newcomers and longtime fans of the franchise. As always with FF, the games are each different from one another, but this is a game that feels like one that is a phenomenal jumping point for those that have never even played a JRPG before, and does have more of a Western vibe going on for it than previous FF iterations. Now, while I'm incredibly positive towards the story, and I feel like for longtime Final Fantasy fans, especially those who are disappointed by 15's story, being incredibly happy about the high quality level of the story, It's the action gameplay that really takes it home for me. There's quite a lot to digest with the action combat system, and if you played the demo, you have a good idea of what to expect. At first, it comes off pretty simple. It's action combat to a T. Dodge, strike, stagger bigger opponents for openings to do significant damage, a couple of abilities to spice up the gameplay, but then as more elements are introduced, this becomes a combat system with so much depth to it. You've got allies that are NPC controlled, but most importantly, outside of Clive's abilities, you have Torgal, who you can command to strike. You can command him to send an enemy into the air and then follow up with Clive's own attack. You can even command Torgal to do some healing. Not a crazy amount of healing, but some healing nonetheless. And then Clive's own ability repertoire begins to expand. You're able to cycle between a variety of different abilities, and it's not just about using these attacks in isolation. While that is certainly something you can do, the true effectiveness comes when you chain various abilities together to create incredibly flashy and stylish combos. Sometimes certain combos will be effective against certain enemies. All of this will expand with abilities that are upgradable, and something that I very much appreciate with so much focus being onto the specific abilities and how you utilize said abilities in tandem, you can reset your ability points and try and upgrade other abilities and see if they are a better fit for you. The constant experimentation with the combat system is one of the biggest strengths of the entire game, and you can do this constant experimentation because there's no penalty in resetting your ability points, and then you can mix and match and decide what's gonna work the best for you. I reset it a couple times. I thought it would be best to go in one direction, then I realized, this probably ain't gonna be for me, and then I reset it. But if deeper in the game you realize, hey, I've been playing the entire game one way, let's shake things up a little bit and go a different way with different abilities, that option's open to you as well, and it's constantly introducing new gameplay mechanics and new gameplay abilities that's gonna spice it up gradually as you progress through the entirety of the game. Now, there are two different game modes you can play this title at. There's an action-focused mode, which I think is ideal, but there is also a story-focused mode, which will equip items to Clive that have him auto-dodge, auto-heal, and do combos more simplified. The story mode also weakens the enemies for a bit. For the majority of you, the action-focused mode is the way to go, and even with that, I would say that the game leans more so on the easy side. Even major boss fights I found to be pretty easy. And when potions and high potions are plentiful, I don't think many of you will have any problem going through the game. And this is someone who would say they're okay at action games, but by no means great at them. So many of you who are, aficionados of action games, I really do believe you're going to be able to blitz through this game fairly easily in the action game mode. Now, after you finish the game, that's when things get a little bit more interesting. You do unlock a new Game Plus component and a harder difficulty option in the Final Fantasy mode, so that might be something more up your alley, but that's only after you beat the game. So keep that in mind as well. And outside of going through the main story, you'll also be able to do various side quests that range in depth. Some of them are literally as simple as delivering food in your hideout, which acts as a bit of a hub world, while others have more of a narrative thread attached to them. The side content has quality to it, and I would imagine most are going to take time to do at least some, if not all of it. Beyond that, you have various optional monsters to slay, an arcade mode with a score attached to it, New Game Plus, as I mentioned, with a harder difficulty. The amount of content in the game is plentiful, although I never found it to be absolutely overwhelming. And they hit a nice sweet spot that makes it easily worthwhile for the $70 purchase. And while some may decide to just go through the main story, that's still gonna end up being a pretty sizable journey in its own right. And of course, throughout the entirety of the game, you'll be accompanied by an absolutely wonderful soundtrack, heightening the moments of grandeur, while also being a bit more calm when necessary. It's Final Fantasy. Like, when have you played a Final Fantasy game that hasn't had a great soundtrack? It's really, how good is it? And I would have to say Final Fantasy XVI soundtrack is pretty darn great. As we wrap up, I want to say this is a game that I'll be talking about for a while, and as I play more, I'm sure to give you my updated thoughts, but it's everything I've wanted out of this game going back to 2020 when I initially saw it. Sure, I have my issues here and there. I could say that some of the NPCs, and yes, quite a lot of them, look pretty bland. The game, as far as difficulty goes, the first playthrough, it would have been nice to see a couple more options, because I do think a lot of people, especially those well-versed in action games, are just going to absolutely steamroll through this game. But that's where New Game Plus does come in, but how many people are going to want to do a second playthrough, I don't know. But the positives greatly outweigh the negatives. And by the way, I did play the entirety of the game in performance mode. It's not a locked 60 frames per second. Quality, it does look great, but for a fast-paced action game for me, I'll take the higher frame rate when I can get it, even if it is a little bit inconsistent. I still found it to be an incredibly satisfying game to play through, not a locked 60 frames per second. I didn't find that to be detrimental to the experience by any stretch of the imagination, and I'll say this, if you played the demo and you enjoyed it, you're gonna really enjoy the full game. A captivating narrative with a combat system with so much depth, albeit a little bit on the easier side for a first playthrough. Final Fantasy XVI officially releases tomorrow, and I would give it a strong recommendation. I'll continue to play the game, and it's gonna be one that I see some people going through the main story and having a quality, you know, 30 to 40 hour experience, and then other people really taking their time, doing all the content, going into New Game Plus, getting me even more invested into the game with the higher difficulty. So as far as how much time you sink into this game, it's really gonna vary person to person, but I think even for the main story playthrough, you'll be satisfied with what you get out of the game. But that'll do it for me. Sound off with all of your thoughts in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.